It started.
And that's who really did 9/11.
I know. Who would have thought about that?
I mean, yeah. And that's not the ethnicity you would have expected.
Really, really very surprising. Not the species either.
Not even,
frankly.
not even really. And so many different parts of that conspiracy.
Exactly. Anyway, hello everyone. Welcome. I am here with Andy Weir. We were just going through, the secrets that he gets as a international famous author about things like 9/11. Who would have known? Who would have known that you got that as part of being a bestseller?
Somebody out there is going to take this seriously.
Yes, exactly. Anyway, of course we are kidding. Anyway, welcome everyone. We are so glad to have you here today. I'm just going to give everyone a couple moments to join the Zoom room. And while we wait for everyone to join, I'm just going to drop a couple of links into the chat. So these links are for where you can find our slides, replays, and all of the links for this event. You can also join us in the Science Fiction Writers Week community. And then the final link in there is for Andy Weir's website, where you can find all his books and the social media that he was just telling me he does not use very often, but it's there if you want to see it.
I respond to DMs. If you DM me, I'll check. Well, the thing is, like, if I respond openly to people, if people just like tag me and say, "Hey, Andy, what do you think of this?" I usually don't respond because I don't want to encourage that for people to be like, "Hey, look, I'm getting attention by doing this." But if you just want to talk to me, if you DM me, I'll respond.
Yes, so you heard it here first. Go to the website, DM Andy all of your questions.
Or email me. Or
yes.
No, I really will.
No, it's very true. I can attest to that. I emailed him and he is here today. So it is very true. Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started. Just really quickly before we do that, please make sure if you have any questions to pop those into the Q&A box, which is right in the center of the screen. That way I can keep track of them while this big, massive chat is going on. Okay, so I want to start by talking about ideas. So before we started this webinar, we were chatting about how you're starting to kind of think about a new project and mentioned that you don't always know that something's going to work and be good. So Can you talk a little bit about that? How do you know an idea is good?
Well, basically, when I'm working up an idea, I'll work on the science stuff and the research, and that's always my favorite part anyway. So that's sorry, I'm trying to full screen my Zoom here and I'm failing. Where the hell is it? I've never had a problem. Oh, there we are. Double click. Okay. So so I love doing the research part of things, but then when it starts to come down to the actual writing, I don't really know if a book is going to suck or not until I've written a few chapters and kind of gotten a feel for how the characters are developing and how the story flows and so on. And so I've had many like book ideas where I've written chapter 1, 2, 3 and gone like, I don't know if this is working, or hey, this has potential. I need to do some reworking, but I think this might work. And so until I'm like cruising along until I get into like the second act in my writing and I'm like, okay, yeah, this is going to work. Only then do I start giving people the elevator pitch of my book that I'm working on. So I'm in the very early stages of my next book right now. And I can't yet guarantee that that's what I'm going to write. I'm certainly having fun with the research and I think I've got some pretty interesting characters. So
what does work mean? Is that in terms of like the plot is moving around, you can see an end? Does it mean the characters are entertaining for you? What does work mean?
Well, I think I've definitely got a good premise and I've got some pretty cool made up physics for the story. Gotta love that fake physics. My character, I have some somewhat complex and nuanced characters, which I'm always trying to do because I consider that my weakest, what I'm worst at is character depth and complexity, because I'm just, I haven't, no one would accuse my books of being literature, right? I just, my characters generally don't have a lot of depth and I would like to work on that. So I've been trying to figure out how to have more interesting and compelling characters with depth. And so I've got some of that going on in this book. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
And
So when you're coming up with these ideas, where are you taking the inspiration from? Is this from research that you're doing just in general? Is it from conversations you're having? Yeah. Where does it come from?
yeah, I get asked that question a lot. I don't really know. I think it mostly comes from just daydreams. I'm always thinking about random ideas where I start off with like, okay, I want to write this. Actually, to be honest, almost all of my stories, the central premise is something that's been done a million times. And so I guess I just like to do it my way. I like to do, damn right, there's a TARDIS in the background. There's also, next to the TARDIS, if I can get my finger working correctly, is a DeLorean from Back to the Future. And although I wouldn't expect anybody to be able to spot it or resolve it, next to the DeLorean is a time turner from Harry Potter.
There's also a cat back there somewhere.
There's also a cat back. I think he's behind that bookshelf there. But anyway, so yes, I have a collection of time machines up there. Anyway, yeah, generally I like to take a premise that some sci-fi premise that I've always loved to read or watch movies about, and then do it my way. So, a guy stranded on Mars. Well, that's not even sci-fi. It's just a stranded person. That's Robinson Crusoe, like survival stories. That's been done a million times, but I did it my way with the science and the yay and the woo. And then like a city on the moon, I did it my way. That's not a unique concept. And then Project Hail Mary is, sorry, if you're here, I hope you've read it. It's a first contact story. And I've always wanted to do First Contact my own way, where I'm like, no, the alien isn't just like, somebody who looks exactly like a human with some forehead bumps and is, compatible with our atmosphere. I want somebody that wouldn't Mark at me. That cat, there he is. There's the cat.
Yeah, he shows up.
that cat's name is Jojo, for those who are interested.
Jojo, aka Mark. Yes.
Mark Catney. Yes. No, that's Jojo. So anyway, yeah. So that's what I like to do. I like to delve into the science. I like to try to make things as scientifically possible. No, the cat is not named after Jojo from JoJo's Bizarre Adventures. He was a rescue, and that was it. Well, actually, he might be named after that Jojo. I don't know. That was his name when I got him, and I figured why change it.
Yeah. So maybe
the shelter, they said, this is Jojo. And I said, okay, that's Jojo.
Maybe that's the trauma we were talking about earlier that Jojo's been carrying with them for forever. So speaking about scientific reality, one of our readers or one of our listeners wanted me to ask you this about specifically the scientific reality of storms on Mars. No, but I think more the question is, how do you decide when to go away from it? Yes. So James, there's your answer.
Yeah. No. Okay. So yes. At the beginning of The Martian, we have a severe storm that threatens to knock over their return vehicle, the MAV. And so they have to evacuate. Mark gets hit by a satellite dish receiver and yada, yada, yada. All that is the premise of The Martian. Hi, Jojo, stealing the show in the background. And of course, in reality, Mars does get windstorms that are up to 150 kilometers per hour. But the atmospheric pressure on Mars is extremely low, less than 1% of Earth's atmosphere. And so the actual force, the inertia of that wind hitting you would feel like a gentle breeze. It would feel about the same as like a 1 or 1/2 mile an hour breeze on Earth. It's that same amount of momentum. So the extremely high wind on Mars would have a hard time knocking over a piece of paper. So the beginning of The Martian very simply could not happen. Like there is no scenario on Mars ever where that could happen. And I knew that at the time I wrote it. But first off, I figured, I'm just writing a story, then posting my website. No one's ever going to care or double check this. And then second off, it was a person versus nature story. So I wanted nature to get the first punch. I could have, I had another idea. I knew when I wrote it that it was BS, but I was like, okay, I had another idea where I was like, okay, maybe instead of it being a storm, It could be like they're doing an engine test and something goes wrong and all hell breaks loose, and they've either got to launch the ship now or lose it, and they think Mark's dead, whatever. But again, I decided this is a human versus, person versus nature story. So I wanted nature to proactively get the first hit in. Only much later, long after The Martian had been made into a movie and it was like super popular, and I got to go to NASA and do tours, some people at NASA said, Mars has lightning. I was like, shh, that would have been great. That would have been great. I could have had a lightning strike start some sort of like, sequence of disasters that led to them having to do it. Well, 2020 hindsight. There's also there's a bunch of stuff. There's also a bunch of things about Mars that are kind of wrong in The Martian, but they're only wrong because that information was discovered after I wrote The Martian.
Yeah.
So for instance, Mark Watney has to do all this work to make water. At the time that I wrote it, it was believed that Mars was just almost completely dry, some water at the poles, and that's it. And so there was no hope. He had to make water, reducing his hydrazine fuel. But then Curiosity landed on Mars after The Martian was published, took up a scoopful of dirt and said, oh, hey, there's a shitload of water in here. And so freaking JPL and NASA ruined everything. And so it turns out if you were to fill a refrigerator with Martian soil, I'm supposed to call it regolith because soil's only found on Earth, but I hate that rule, so I'm calling it soil. If you filled a refrigerator with Martian soil and then extracted all of the ice out of it, all the water that's there in the form of ice, you would have about 70 liters of water. So you'd have like 35 2-liter bottles full of water from that. So all Mark had to do was bring dirt inside and heat it up. But I didn't know that, and nobody knew that at the time I wrote it. However, Curiosity is like near the base of Mount Sharp on the completely other side of the planet. Mark is in Acidalia planitia, which I can just claim as a writer is a desert. Yeah. So until you test the water in Acidalia planitia, I claim that just like we have the Sahara and we have the Amazon rainforest, I say that Mars has, ecological or just weather zones, and I say Acidalia planitia is a desert. So there.
Yeah, I don't think anyone on this Zoom call can really speak against that. Can call you on that, and I feel like it's similar to everyone who
These are nerds. No. Yeah. These are nerds. These are my people. And also, when people I get a lot of people pointing out flaws and errors in my books, and I always say like bring it on, because I bring this on myself by telling everyone, hey guys, I wrote a story and it's scientifically accurate. And nerds, when they hear that, are like,
let me add it.
Let me get my calculator finger going. Let's double check everything.
Yeah.
and I love that. I love that. Yeah. Especially when I know that somewhere some nerd did all the checked all the other stuff too, and it passed muster, and that nerd must be like, all right, this guy's okay,
Yeah.
There was a group of orbital dynamicists, people who work out orbital paths and stuff like that, who double checked the Rich Purnell maneuver from The Martian as detailed in the book, and they said I was accurate to about like within 2%.
Nice. That's a great badge of honor. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a badge of honor. However, if you were off by 2% in a real orbital trajectory, you would miss Mars entirely. But
creative license.
Yeah,
So what does your research process when preparing for these scientifically accurate books? What does it look like?
It looks like Google.
Yeah.
I just do scientific inspiration. Scientific information, that's what I meant to say, is very easy to find online. It's generally very publicly shared. The people who create it are proud to talk about it, especially in the space industry. And so I happen to be in a field where the stuff I need to find is very well documented online. Also, there's a lot of overlap between people who document scientific stuff and people who are like internet literate,
Yeah.
So they know how to make web pages. They know how to post this stuff online. And I mean, probably 7 times out of 10, I just end up at a Wikipedia article. Wikipedia is actually fantastic for scientific information. It's like, you want to see how the Lorentz transformations were derived? Wikipedia will tell you. Might not understand it, but it's there.
Yeah. And there's something to community moderation as well. I feel like there are the people who are creating Wikipedia articles about that know something to be able to put it out there,
Right.
and want to share that information.
Sometimes I know I'm off in the weeds sometimes when I'm like looking something up and it's not something Wikipedia covers, and then I end up finding it on some the information I need on some university website. Another place where I get a lot of my information is from test questions that are online. Like, so, for this university, this upper division physics class, blah, 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 here's a question for a quiz that is very similar to the question I'm looking for. So I'm like, oh, okay. And then let me see the walkthrough on the answer, and then I'll understand it better.
I feel like that could even be a source of inspiration. You could be like, they're like calculating this trajectory. What is and you could be like, well, if B is incorrect, what would happen if we calculated it this way? So almost like a writing prompt.
In the chat, someone named Nick just said, oh, I used to live near Watney Market. So that's where you got the inspiration for the name. Actually, no. At the time I started the book, I hadn't defined a name for the main character yet, and I had to come up with something. And so I said, well, his first name could be Mark, because that goes down to a Latin root from Mars. So Mars, the god of war. And then for Watney, I was trying to come up with a last name. I wanted just some kind of generic last name, but not too generic, not like Smith. At the time, I was living in Boston. I was a big Red Sox fan, and the sideline reporter for the Red Sox was named Heidi Watney. And so I'm like, that's a cool name. I'll take that.
Yeah. I hope my dad is watching this, because he's a huge Red Sox fan. So we were just talking about how he wanted to
if he remembers in the late 2000s, around 2009, 2008, that era was Heidi Watney was the sideline reporter for the Red Sox, took over for Tina Servasio. Why do I remember that? I don't know. I can't remember my own phone number, but I remember that. But anyway, so yeah.
That's just being a Red Sox fan, I think. It's just having a bunch of very strange statistics in your head. For years and years. Okay, I want to shift back to your career change. So for those who don't know, Andy worked as a software engineer for 2 decades, I believe, before becoming a full-time writer. So writing was always the dream. Is that true?
That's right. Yeah, I always wanted to be a writer. And when I was 18 and it was time to go to college and choose a major, I genuinely did deliberate between software engineering or literature. I decided I wanted a regular meals. So I went for software engineering, and that was a good call. But I was always writing, always trying to break into the market. The Martian was my 3rd full-length novel. I mean, and I'd written bajillions of short stories. So
were they all science fiction or speculative fiction?
Let me think. All science fiction and some attempts at fantasy.
Yeah. Okay. And what draws you to this genre besides your interest in space and science?
I guess I love the science. I love taking something small, making some little bit of physics that I make up, and then running with it. Right?
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, so for Project Hail Mary, astrophage, the idea of just sort of a mold that propagates from star to star, and I was like, well, what if that would, well, then you could use that as a spacecraft fuel, and everything just kept ballooning from there, all from just a fairly small little MacGuffin in there. So I like to just run with it, take something simple and run with it.
Yeah, just play it out and kind of see what happens.
Yeah, I always get mildly annoyed at science fiction where they have some MacGuffin that the characters don't fully explore. I was like I've always had a lot of questions about the transporters in Star Trek. I'm like, okay, you can teleport. This is a big deal.
Yes.
This is a big deal. You are not using this often enough. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. And I say well, for starters, if you're in a fight with an enemy ship, why not transport a bomb? Okay, yeah, I know. Shields block particle transport. That's very well established. Can you? If your shield's up, you can't beam aboard. Okay, but could you beam something like right next to the ship, like just outside the shields, like a big cluster of photon torpedoes set to explode? Like, it's just like, once you have this trans-dimensional like ability to move, I don't know. And so I'm like,
it's true.
and then not only that, but they've done all sorts of weird stuff like, oh yeah, we kept the person in the transporter buffer. So the person's just like in a buffer. I'm like, you could do that? So like,
now you can, yeah.
Yeah, well then couldn't you just do that for lots of things? Couldn't you like have a cargo vessel that just says like, okay, put all the cargo you want me to transport, to move somewhere. I'm going to transport it all into a transporter buffer, and then take a little ship off to wherever you want to deliver it, and then transport it down, Or someone is sick. This was in Strange New Worlds. Someone's sick, put them in a buffer. What says someone needs emergency surgery and we're far from a starbase? Throw them in the buffer. It's like, you guys just are not using this enough.
So do you feel like it's fair to say that you have a deep understanding of all of the science? And obviously with the caveat that science changes, you're not, a doctorate in these areas, but do you feel like you have a good understanding of all of the science that you write about, so that you would be able to answer questions like that to the most part?
I mean, I guess my broad answer to that would be no. I don't feel like I have enough of an understanding. I do enough research to make a book that's internally consistent, but I'm not a real scientist. I can't answer all the questions someone might have. I could probably on a lot of these things find the answer through research, and I understand enough of the basics that I could learn what I need to learn to get the answer. But no, I would not consider myself an expert. I don't consider myself a scientist or any sort of expert. I'm just an enthusiast, and I enjoy the research. So.
Well, and I ask because in some of the previous authors that we've spoken to this week have mentioned that for them, sometimes that kind of behind the scenes stuff, those questions you were just talking about, they don't think about them too much. They're just kind of like, I'll get to that when I get to that, right? I'll get to the physics of how this works, or the laws around how this works when it's important to the narrative. And it seems a bit like your research process is more about understanding, at least to some extent, understanding that a bit before you start to write, or while you're writing as well.
Yeah, I do the research first. And because oftentimes I will end up with plot events that I wouldn't have thought of due to the research. So I start by researching all the math and physics. And if I'm going to make up some fake physics, I explore it as deeply as possible. And so, like, for instance, doing all the research helped give me a bunch of cool plot points. So for instance, we already talked about Mark on Mars needing the water. Well, that came from, I was doing research on how you grow potatoes. I'm like, how do you grow potatoes? All right, I'm on Mars. What do you need to grow potatoes? And I looked up a bunch of like agricultural sites and stuff like that on how to grow potatoes, and it gave because agriculture is a science. It's it's a very, very well researched science. And it mentioned a bunch of things, including it mentioned what the water content of the soil needs to be for potato plants to flourish. I'm like, well, yeah, of course there has to be a certain minimum water content. And then I was like, wait a minute. And I worked out that he would need like, well over 1,000 meters of water to make this farm work. And I'm like, they would not have brought a metric ton of water with them, right? They'd have a small amount that they'd be recycling and repurifying. They wouldn't have, so where's he going to get that water? And then I'm like, and at the time we believed Mars was a desert. So I had to come up with a whole side plot of how he manufactured the water. And that made the story more interesting and gave it more like veritas or verisimilitude. Gravitas, it makes it seem more realistic if the character runs into a scenario that the reader doesn't anticipate. And then later the reader goes like, oh, well, of course that would be a problem. That just that helps the reader's suspension of disbelief when the reality of the book keeps coming back and saying like, oh yeah, right. Here's something you didn't think of,
Yeah.
So
I want to shift gears a bit to Cheshire Crossing. What was the genesis of that story for you?
Cheshire Crossing. Yeah, that was before The Martian. That was before everything. What was it that made me really interested in that? Well, I have a history of fanficking. I mean, I was a
Mhm.
fanfic author. I wrote Doctor Who fanfics. I wrote a bunch of Sherlock Holmes fan fiction centered around a young Moriarty as he starts his criminal
Nice.
enterprise. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I tried to for the Sherlock Holmes stuff. That was fun because I was trying to emulate Conan Doyle's writing style. So
Yeah.
I have this kind of 19th century style prose, and it's told first person by Moriarty's right hand man, as opposed to Sherlock Holmes stories are told by
Yeah. Yeah.
Watson.
Watson.
Anyway,
Yep.
um, anyway, so I was a fanficker, and a lot of fan fiction involves crossovers, like crossover fan
Yeah.
fiction. So I was starting to think about like I don't know how I ended up landing on those characters, but I was like, you know, those fantasy characters, those like Alice in Wonderland, Dorothy from the Wizard of Oz, and Wendy from Peter
Indeed.
Pan.
Yeah.
They all have one thing in common. They all go from the real world into some other world
Yeah.
and then come back. And I'm like, so these girls all have something in common. So I was like, okay, well, let's bring them all together and get studied, and then just having a big ass crossover where, you know, and that was just pure fun, just pure
Yeah.
fun. I'm like, of course the Wicked Witch and Captain Hook have a romantic side plot.
Why not? Yeah.
Of course they do. Those two get along great.
Yeah. I think fanfic. I started writing fan fiction. That was the first that I wrote. I wrote Lord of the Rings fan fiction, I think, first, and was trying to emulate Tolkien as like a 10-year-old, which I feel like was an ambitious project. But what I find really great about fan fiction is that it lets you explore plot and story without having to worry quite so much about character, because you are
The
you're
characters
working
exist.
with like an exactly, it's an existing property that folks know. So for
And you
me
don't
it
need
was
to deal
really
with the world
helpful.
building.
Exactly, you don't have to, unless you're
Right.
crossing over, then I guess you kind of have to explain some of the logistics about how that works,
Yeah,
but
well,
not too much, people get
that was
it.
fun. In Cheshire Crossing, it's like we find out that's like, oh, well, you know, witches melt when you splash them with water. That's a property of Oz.
Yeah.
So if you're a witch and you get hit with water and you're in Oz, you're gonna melt. And that happens to Mary Poppins. Like, so Mary Poppins is in Oz and she gets splashed with water, so she melts.
Yeah. Yeah, the beauties of bringing characters into different worlds. I
Yeah.
have not read a crossover fanfic in a very long time. I feel like all of the stuff, the most recent things I've read have all been more like realistic, like, oh, you know, we're putting Daenerys at like she works at a coffee shop now or something like that. So it's been a long time since I've read
What
a
a
crossover
waste.
fic.
What a waste of fanfic potential. If you're going to write a
I know.
fanfic about Daenerys, write it either in Martin's universe or some other fantasy universe or something.
Yeah, I
It's like,
know.
well,
But
what about if you I don't know, what if you put Daenerys in Pern? Can she just tell the dragons what to do?
yeah,
That's an interesting
exactly.
question. What if you put Daenerys in Middle Earth? Hey, Smog, kneel. Does that work?
Does it work? Yeah.
What?
Oh, yeah, that's so interesting. It's also interesting. I feel like some authors now are starting to do like universal, multiversal crossovers of their own work. Obviously, like the MCU is doing that with, which is
Well,
not even really a crossover because it's
but
the
that's not
same
a crossover.
property.
It's just, yeah,
Yeah,
it's just,
it's the
you know,
same.
it's like,
Yeah.
it's a shared universe.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Sarah Moss, who writes fantasy, who's now starting to bring all her like fantasy worlds into one, which is interesting. Would you ever do a crossover of all of your different characters?
There is there's reasonably strong evidence to say that Artemis and the Martian take place in a shared setting. And Project Hail Mary definitely doesn't. Like, people ask me, oh, is Project Hail Mary in the same setting as the Martian or Artemis? I'm like, well, no, because Project Hail Mary takes place modern day. The Martian and
Yeah.
Artemis take place in the future. So I think if the events of Project Hail Mary had happened in the past for the Martian and Artemis, it would have affected things like, you know, the global catastrophe, that happened, and also access to astrophage during these space missions might have been handy, so no.
So we're not going to learn that Mark Watney's great grandfather was
Ryland Grace.
Like yeah.
No.
Not
No.
yet. Okay, fair enough.
No.
So you mentioned you were starting to work on character development. How are you practicing that? How are you trying to get better at that?
Well, I'm always trying to get better at it. So The Martian was a popular book and definitely a successful book, but Mark Watney was not a deep character. He was likable. He was a likable character. People enjoyed spending time with him, but he didn't have any depth. Like, you don't know anything about him. You read the entire book. By the end of it, all you know is that he's smart, he's snarky, and he didn't want to die. But that's it. You don't know anything about his history. You don't know anything about like any aspect other than he's like a trained astronaut, which is a pretty successful thing. But like, you don't know anything about him. So he has no depth. My second book, Artemis, the one everyone forgets about, I tried to put more of that in. So I went out of my way to add like depth and complexity to Jazz, the main character. And so Mark Watney is really just my personality with all the bad stuff removed. He's all the aspects of myself that I like and none of the stuff that I don't like. And then of the stuff I like, it's magnified. So I'm funny, he's really funny. I'm smart, he's really smart. But he doesn't have any of my neuroses or fears or problems like that. Okay, well, Jazz from Artemis is more like the real me. The real me, the way I was when I was her age. In other words, she's 26 during the events of Artemis. And so people don't expect the Saudi woman who's 26 years old to be a self-insertion character, but she really was. She's all the aspects of myself, the realistic flaws that I had when I was that age. She wasn't, she's immature for her age, just like I was. She is ostensibly smart, but not making use of it and really just squandering her potential, which I was. And then also she makes a lot of bad life decisions that lead her to problems. And so I'm like, this is a believable character with depth. And the end result was people didn't like her. It's hard to root for a character that's that like immature and self-destructive. And so I was like, okay, so people like the idealized me. They don't really like the real me that much. Okay, it's good to know. But
noted.
Noted. But more importantly, it was an important reminder that, okay, just making a character realistic doesn't automatically make them a good character. Good as in likable, as in if the reader stops rooting for the protagonist, you've lost them. And so I made Jazz a little too flawed. Flaws are great in characters. They add depth. They make them even more empathetic because readers are aware that they themselves have flaws, so they can empathize with a character who's flawed. But I guess I made Jazz just too obnoxious and immature. And so people are like, if you knew Mark Watney in real life, you'd probably like to go have a beer with him, right? But if you knew Jazz in real life, you'd be like, yeah, no, I'm good. You're kind of annoying. I'll pass. So for Ryland, I tried to is the protagonist in Project Hail Mary. I tried to strike a balance. I was like, okay, he has flaws. Some of them you don't find out about till the very end of the book, but he's flawed. But his flaws are more calm than the stark flaws that Jazz had. His flaws are that he's a bit naive. He's conflict averse to the point that he'll rearrange his life to avoid it, which is not a healthy attitude. And I think a lot of people can empathize with that. And he's kind of going it alone, and I think these are flaws that a lot of people can empathize with and understand. And so I think I kind of got a good balance with Ryland. Also, a lot of people say, I love Rocky's character. Again, Rocky is very likable, but he doesn't have much growth, which is okay. That's okay. The complexity and growth comes from Ryland.
Yeah. Well,
Jojo seems a little peeved. No, he's just he's just got resting bee face.
That's just what cats
all.
Look like. Yeah, cats are just always looking.
Yeah, he's just judging me from over there.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say, I think your discussion about how Mark feels very flat is true to the fact that The Martian is, like you were saying, a person versus nature story, right? That is the primary conflict. The growth
Yeah.
is about what we're trying to figure out is, does Mark get off Mars? Like, does he
Yeah.
survive? We don't need to know that he, who he was and his nerves and his deep-seated fears, because that kind of person versus nature conflict just overtakes it so much. But there's adding the layers of interpersonal conflict, and the internal conflict can then be something that as writers we add to, again, have that kind of character growth as we go. Yeah. Okay. So let me jump into some of the questions that we have from our audience, because they are coming fast and furious. Oh, this was actually one of mine, which is your author bio says you make a mean cocktail. What is your
I
favorite
do.
one to make?
To make, I don't know, to drink, my favorite one and is a rum old fashioned. So you make an old fashioned, but you use a dark rum instead of whiskey. My particular recipe is a dark rum, either like Ranzacapa. I like, that's one. I like, yeah. So Ranzacapa is a good one. 2 ounces of that plus maybe an eighth of an ounce of simple syrup, plus 2 dashes of orange Angostura bitters and 2 dashes of normal Angostura bitters. Serve on the rocks in a low ball glass. Tasty.
Perfect. Sounds great. Some MB asks, how much of The Martian had you written and revised before you started posting it publicly?
I posted it as I wrote it. So, because I originally posted it just to my website, it was a serial, and I didn't know the end when I posted the beginning.
It's like fanfic, yeah.
Yeah, no, straight up. Like I finished chapter 1, I posted chapter 1. But I also did make it clear to all my readers, hey, I reserve the right to go back and change earlier chapters as this book develops. So the things I'm putting down right now aren't necessarily canon. Like they might change. This isn't a chiseled in stone serial publication. This is you watching me write a book. So
yeah.
And when I would make changes like that, I'd tell my readers, I'd email the list. I'd be like, hey, everybody, I changed chapter 2. You can either reread chapter 2 or here's a description of what I changed. And so basically the engineer in me, it's release notes.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
A few of our engineers have asked what type of engineering you do.
I did it for 25 years, so a lot of it. I started out writing C and C++, and early on, I was working on a word processor for the Mac called Nisus Writer. I worked for that company. I spent a couple of years at Blizzard, where I worked on Warcraft 2, which a lot of people are surprised to learn. And then I worked for America Online, which kind of shows my age a bit. And then finally, then after that, I spent the next like the rest of my career working in mobile development, so writing software that runs on mobile devices, and that would be in usually a lot of it was in straight C, a lot of C++, a lot of Java, and the bare minimum amount of C#. C# is the language of if you're going to write an app to run on the iPhone, and I hate it. So but fortunately, it's a superset of C++. I don't want to bore everybody, but long story short, you can write a wrapper layer so that you can just get all the icky, gross C# stuff out of the way, and then have your app written in proper C++ the way God intended.
Great. So how is it transitioning from the blog posts of The Martian to the novel? What was that process like?
Well, once I finished the last chapter that I'd posted, I thought I was done, but then people said, "Hey, I love your book, but I hate your website," and it's crap. My website was just white, just a white background with black text. Like it's like the Soviet tractor factory of websites, right? And so they said, "Can you put it in a form that I can download and put on my ebook?" And I said, sure. So I made an EPUB and a Mobi version, because Mobi existed back then. And then I said, yeah, now you can download this if you want. And then other people said, like, hey, I'm not really scientifically literate, or rather technically literate. I don't know how to download a thing from the internet and put it on my Kindle. Can you just put it up there through Kindle's system? So I found out how to do that, and I posted it to Kindle as a self-published book, setting the price to the minimum of 99 cents. And there it started really selling well and making its way up the bestsellers list of sci-fi, and then eventually all Kindle. And that got the attention of print publishers and agents and film studios. So just do that if you want to have my writing.
Just publish a couple, publish a few stories, then put it in a PDF, put it on Kindle, you'll be fine.
Just do that. You'll be good.
So did you have any hesitations about going and working with a huge publisher after self-publishing?
No, it was a dream come true.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a writer my whole life. I guess
you were already successful.
Yeah, right. It was what I really, really wanted. I always wanted that. I mean, it's what I've been fantasizing about since I was a kid. Of course, when I was a kid, there wasn't e-publishing or anything. Traditional publishing was it, and it was extremely difficult to break into. It still is, and so it's this huge accomplishment that I thought would never happen. And it was it was such a thrill. The first time I saw like my book on a shelf at a bookstore, I was like,
yeah.
I was there. My mom took pictures with me. I'm like,
that's me.
It's my book.
What was the most surreal moment for you in terms of your career since this has happened?
Yeah. Okay. So there were a few. One of them, I think the main one was when I was first, when they were making the movie, and they invited me to see an early cut of the movie where they had, most of the special effects weren't in yet. You could see the wires carrying people around in the zero-G scenes. And you could, and they were just like, seriously, in the background, Mars in the background was like clearly just a really grainy JPEG. And it was like that. But just so I went into a little viewing room at 20th Century Fox at their lot in LA, and just like sat there and watched like The Martian. And I just remember just the theme, the title placard coming up, and I was just like, they did this. This is real. They haven't been lying to me. Look, there's Matt Damon, there's Jessica Chastain. They're all saying those lines.
I wrote that. There they are.
I wrote that. Now there they are doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine that would be fairly surreal.
Yeah.
Especially I think, might we all have Matt Damon play our idealized self-insert self? I feel like
exactly.
Like, yeah, that's the real dream. So had you queried before with your previous novels that you did not publish before The Martian?
The first one I knew was not good. Like the first book I wrote, even I knew was crap. So I'm like, well, that's your first pancake out of the way. And then the second one I did really try to get published. Back when I was working for America Online, you've got mail. Yeah. So I got laid off from AOL when they merged with Netscape. Yes, this is all stuff from the previous century, folks.
Yes.
All stuff from the 1900s. I got laid off along with 850 other people during that merger. And I ended up with a bunch of money via stock options, and I could live for like 3 years without working.
Nice.
And so I did. I said, like, I'm going to write a book and I'm going to try to get it published. So I wrote a book and I tried to get it published, and I failed. But lots of queries. I didn't go directly to publishers. I went to agents, literary agents, and got no action, no, just all rejection. So I did pay my dues for what it's worth, for the people who feel like I bungled into it. I did bungle into it, but first I paid my dues, then I bungled into it. So
yeah, that's very fair. Good, important distinction. Have you thought about publishing that book at all? Now that you probably can, can take it to someone.
Well, definitely not in its current form. It's just not that good. I've learned a lot about. It's kind of nice. Like I can read that book and say, like, "Wow, this sucks," and I know why. So, like, I'm a better writer now than I was at the time. The plot is decent. Actually, the basic format of the plot, and I have considered a plot flow that modernizes it. But just basically, it'd be a complete rewrite. but making it more in the hard sci-fi genre that I've fallen into here. And I actually did come up with what I think is a pretty cool concept, but I've got other ideas I like more. I think I might have caught a glimpse of one of your pets for a moment.
Oh yeah, he's right here. There's one there
Oh,
and
in
one
his
over
bed.
there. They're just
There we
hanging
go.
around. Yeah.
And there's mine.
They're yeah. Your cat is being very, very nice. Mine was here and then thankfully ran away before jumping on the on my desk.
Well, oftentimes you'll see like tail, like
yeah, exactly.
tail.
Just cat butt, cat butt wherever.
So
when you
cat
start
ass, butthole.
exactly right in the middle, right center. Yeah. Did the publisher have any concerns that you had already previously published The Martian? Did you have to do anything special or different because of that?
No, they just wanted me to take it down.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're like, we're going to give you a bunch of money for this, but you got to stop giving it away.
Like, great. I will do that.
I suppose that's reasonable.
Yeah. And then how did it feel to attempt the next book after that? Yeah.
That was a lot of stress. Working on Artemis was a lot of stress because I'm like, how do you follow up The Martian? It was such a sudden lightning in a bottle hit. And so there was a lot of stress on that. But then I finally decided, look, just keep your expectations reasonable. I will consider it a win if people read the book and say, I didn't like it as much as The Martian, but I liked it.
Yeah.
And I'd call that a win. And that's more or less what happened. Although that skips over the fact that I spent a year writing a completely different book after The Martian, but before Artemis. It was going to be called Jacques. And I thought this was going to be my magnum opus. This was going to be book one of like 17. And it was just going to be like what I'm known for. And like The Martian was going to be my hunt for Red October.
Yeah.
And everything else, I had it all worked out and everything like that. But I got 70,000 words in and realized that the story sucked. It just wasn't working. And for reference, The Martian, the entire book is about 100,000 words.
Yeah, so you're pretty close to the end.
No, that's another problem. I wasn't close
you were
to
not.
the end. It was going to be some gigantic megatome that also that people weren't even going to want to read.
Yeah.
So I shelved that, and that hurt. And I wrote Artemis instead. I'm glad I did. I know that it wasn't as popular as my other books, but believe me, Jacques would have absolutely tanked. However, what I did do was I used it for parts. There were some cool things in Jacques here and there, and so I stole them for Project Hail Mary.
Yeah. And have you done that with any of your previous stories or attempts at novels?
Cannibalized them for parts?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I guess anything that I haven't published are ideas that are free to use in anything I'm working on.
Yeah, exactly. Someone asked if you had considered going back, kind of like you were mentioning that when you were first initially publishing The Martian, you would update potentially previous chapters. Have you considered going back and updating in light of all the new Mars science that's out there, making a lightning storm kick it off or anything like that?
No, it's a product of its time, and it's just going to stay that way. Otherwise, what am I going to do? Just constantly maintain all my prior novels?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it's not worth it. It's just going to be wrong. You know, and over time, it's probably going to be more and more wrong, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's the way it is. Like, I remember there was a Robert Heinlein book, forget what it was, but there was this interstellar ship. The physics were pretty good, actually, because they'd use like, they'd accelerate to relativistic speeds to go from one star to another, all that jazz. And they would explore other planets and take photos of everything because they're exploring it. And at one point the ship was in trouble and they had to accelerate really hard to get out of thing, and they're pulling like 12 G's or something like that. And what they're really worried about at this point is that the forces might break the photographic plates they have in storage, thus ruining all their pictures. Because this interstellar spaceship doesn't have digital storage, doesn't have anything. It just has glass photographic plates.
How would you know? Yeah.
Right, exactly. So it's like, that's one of those things.
Yeah, I always think about that with Jurassic Park. It's like we didn't know dinosaurs were birds until very recently, and so there's all this media that has them roaring and with all these scales, and it's like no, They probably had feathers.
Well, to be fair, Jurassic Park did retcon it in one of the Jurassic World
yeah, the
movies.
new ones. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the scientist guy, he said like, "Hey man, this has never been about reality. I mean, we backfilled their DNA as best we could, but I mean, the dinosaurs here don't look anything like the real dinosaurs from the past. So shut up."
Yeah. I noticed in the most recent movie they had more feathers as well on
Yeah.
some of them, which is great. So someone asked about the open ending of Project Hail Mary. How did you come up with that as the kind of conceit of what you wanted for the ending of that story?
Of Project Hail Mary?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is. I knew that was going to be the ending before I wrote the first line. I mean, I had that. Everything was heading toward that ending all along, so everything was kind of built around that.
Yeah. Do you typically start with endings first, or do you start with just kind of goes?
Just kind of generally, I start with the idea or concept first of like guys trapped on Mars, or girl who grew up on the moon, or
Yeah.
you know, or invasive life form, starts dimming the sun.
Yeah.
Work from there.
Yeah.
And but in the case of Project Hail Mary, I knew from the beginning what the ending scene was going to be, and then I was just
going to
make sure I got to it.
Yeah. Who's the first person who reads your books once they're drafted?
Usually my agent, I guess, would be my first, because I send him chapters 2 and 3 at a time to get his feedback. And then every few of those cycles, maybe every 6 chapters or so, I'll send it to my editor to get his feedback.
Yeah.
And so I guess they're the first to read my books.
Do you have anybody read for scientific accuracy at all?
No, I don't do that. I do sometimes later on during the editing process at Random House. They've always given me the same copy editor every time. And she's a copy editor. I mean, that's what she does, but she's also extremely scientifically literate. Like she knows the math, she knows the science, and she will double check all the scientific claims and stuff in my book and point them out. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I guess she's the only copy editor they have that is also really good at like math and stuff.
Yeah. You're like, this one's Andy's.
Yeah, this one's Andy's. So that goes to Angela.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so lost my train of thought there. In terms of double checking the science and math. No, but I did for writing Artemis. I was really insecure about having a female main character because I'm not female, and I'm like, I don't want this to be just like a dude wrote a female character, right? There's your dog. There's your dog. There's a puppy.
Yeah,
see the puppy. Hello, puppy. Knox.
Yeah.
Knox. Do you also have a dog named Lumos?
No, funny story, but I almost did, and I do not. But that was a plan once upon a time. You're the first person who's ever asked me that, but that was the plan.
You're wondering where Jojo is just off screen right now.
Oh. So cute.
Anyway, okay, double checking. Yeah, so I was really insecure about writing a female lead. And so I wanted it to get checked by as many women as possible, but I also can't just let anybody see my manuscripts because they'll post them straight to the Pirate Bay, right? So I basically, every woman I knew personally that I trusted. So like my girlfriend at the time, my mother, my editor is a man, but his boss is a woman. So she read it for me also. And then the copy editor I mentioned is a woman. And so we asked her specifically, while you're doing your copy editing, please also do developmental editing on how realistic this character is as a woman. Point out anything that looks like, oh, this is what a man would say, this isn't what a woman would say, or this isn't how most women would phrase it, whatever. And so I got all that feedback. I also had her character is a lapsed Muslim. And one of the women that I had read it was a Muslim, non-lapsed Muslim. And so I said, let me know if I get anything wrong about Islam in there. And so So I took all their feedback and, implemented things. And I still got called out for, sounds like a dude wrote her. I'm like, well, I did it.
Yeah.
I tried. I
Yeah.
put real effort into getting genuine feedback from actual women.
Yeah. Well, and there's not a monolithic experience of what it's like to be a man or a woman or anything. So I think, yeah, it's very fair. How about the process of Project Hail Mary becoming a movie? Has that been different this time around than it was for The Martian?
Yeah, it's been a bit different. First off, I've got a little bit more flex in Hollywood. So this time I insisted on box office gross. So I get a percent. Oh, Pat's terrified about something.
Hi, Jojo.
Oh, hey, hang on 1 second. Yeah.
Oh, you're fine.
One second, sorry.
No, yeah, no worries.
Sorry, I'm going to need to just 30 seconds.
Fine.
Sorry about that.
You are fine. The joys of Zoom. I will just say to everyone who's watching this as we wait for Andy, we're going to start the session with World Anvil right at 6 p.m. So I do not think, unfortunately, we'll have a chance to get through all of the questions that we have, of which there are so many great ones. But I'm going to put Andy's contact information in the chat again. As he said at the beginning. No worries. I was just telling everyone that they can send all their questions to DMs after this, since you have given us permission.
Sure. Or just email me. I mean,
yep. Either way.
And you can find my email online. It's very easy to find. You just Google around for it. I don't have a secret email. That's my email.
Yeah. So movie process, you were saying you have insisted on box office gross. Yeah.
Which means for The Martian, I got a flat amount of money. It was nice, but I didn't get any percentage of the box office proceeds. This time around, I said, I want box office proceeds. And a lot of the studios said, we don't do that for writers. We do that for producers, but we don't do that for writers. And I'm like, I want box office receipts.
Yep.
And then MGM said, we don't do that for writers, but we can make you a producer. So that's
excellent.
I'm like, you win. And so that's what I've got going this time. And we have Ryan Gosling set to play Ryland Grace, which is good because they have the same initials. So that's important.
Exactly the same person. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the process of writing the script been like?
Well, I don't write the screenplay.
Oh, okay.
The screenplay is being written by Drew Goddard, who is the same guy who did the screenplay adaptation of The Martian. Yeah. So they were just saying they didn't give box office receipts to the original writer. That was why you didn't qualify originally, because you were the writer of the original property. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't. They only give box office receipts to producers, and in some cases, and oftentimes it'll be like big name stars, like stars that can flex enough
like
to
Ryan
get
Gosling.
Like Ryan Gosling, yeah. Or Yeah. And so you'll find that in the cases where the writers actually get a piece of the movie pie, like J.K. Rowling, for instance, you'll find she's a producer.
Yeah. Okay, we have time for one final question. So Sana asks, how do you go about writing humor? Does that happen organically, or do you consciously craft every joke?
It happens organically. I'm a smart ass. So it comes natural to me. It's a blessing and a curse. I got my ass kicked a lot in school.
Yeah. And now
I like to say,
you.
I'm proud to say I lost every fight that I was in high school, and I earned every ass beating that I received.
That's
so
fair, yeah.
I feel like because when you've got a zinger, when you've got a great comeback, a great zinger in your head, you can't just keep it in. It's like, this can get my ass kicked, but I gotta say.
It's a very writer thing to say. You just got to get it out when you have it. Oh my gosh. Do you have any like zingers that you remember that were the best?
Oh man. I don't know. Remember. I think there was this snotty popular girl and her thug posse of football player buddies, and she was being really bitchy to me. And so I said something, F off, whatever. Yeah. And she said, you son of a bitch. And I said, whatever, mom.
Great.
I got beat up
to
get a son of a bitch. Therefore, she's my mom.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
I got beat up.
Yeah. Well, Andy, thank you truly so much. This was such a fantastic conversation. You are so much fun. Thank you for sharing the secrets of the true species who perpetrated 9/11 with me. I will take it to my grave as you're supposed to. And thank you everyone so much for joining. Andy, we're just going to keep this link open because we have another session starting very shortly, but you can head off
I
and
see
hang
how
out
it
with
is.
JoJo.
I see how it is.
Goodbye. Great
Andy,
to
there's
see
the
you.
door. Don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out.
Goodbye.
Okay.
Yes.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you. All right. Hello, everyone. Let me just let World and Build know they can join, and we will start again. So feel free to take a quick bathroom break and join us back in just another minute. We will start shortly. Hello, it looks like Janet and Demetrius are just joining us. We will get started very soon. Oh, let me let you guys start camera. You should be able to now. Hello. Hi.
Hello.
Hi, we just finished up the best conversation with Andy Weir. So we still have everybody still hanging out here in the chat because we're just back to back fun. All right, well, I'm going to turn it over to both of you. I'm just going to pause this recording and then start another one to make it easy to add it